everyone, and welcome to 20 something. This week was many things, but it was by no means uneventful. One of the stories that came to us that was pretty shocking, which is like a lot of the stories surrounding this whole pandemic, was the COVID relief funds that were given to the Pentagon apparently have not been used for COVID relief usages. They were directed towards means of national defense and like construction of airplanes and stuff like that. And so Rachel was researching that, and following that we'll have Nate telling us about the difference between COVID and allergies, and I will follow that with some research on Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her replacement in the Supreme Court, followed by Quiggs with her story on death by licorice. So Rachel, would you like to get us started with the COVID relief funds and what exactly went wrong there?
Sure. So Congress gave the CARES Act. I don't know, like some of us were helped out by the CARES Act, and it's coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security. And they gave $1 billion to the Pentagon to use that to help for COVID relief. And they used it for, military use and new uniforms and defense contractors. And I don't think the money was used in the right way at all, but the Pentagon claims that it was COVID relief because the military was affected by COVID, which it probably was. So they're saying that since they were affected by COVID, they get to give them money. But I think what Congress really thought it should be is, hospitals and vaccines and people who still have shortages of like the N95 masks. So I don't know, some people will say it's just a misunderstanding and or just purposely used in the wrong way. But I think they purposely used it and just found a loophole in it. And I don't think it was used correctly for, the health of Americans overall.
So you are under the belief that the COVID funds should have been going towards hospitals and healthcare workers and the people that are directly working to fix the pandemic, correct?
I think it should have been, more for hospitals and health.
Okay. What do you think about that, Nate?
I think about the same thing. What I took away from it was that, hospitals do have a shortage of masks and PPE, and, using it for the military is great and everything, but the hospitals need that money right now more than that. So I felt like it was a little bit unfair to the healthcare workers.
I think that they were not used properly and that this was not a misunderstanding. So I think the Pentagon definitely meant to do exactly what they did, which is taking relief funds that were meant for the American people and shoving it towards more military spending, which is frankly ridiculous considering, as a country, we spend more money on our military than any other country already, to an outrageous amount. So for this $1 billion to just again be shuttled to the military when our people are suffering and dying is ridiculous to me.
Yeah, there's like 202,000 Americans like dead, and they're like, no, we need better forms.
But jet engines?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we don't have enough money already for that.
Yeah.
I do believe that is I don't believe that was used properly whatsoever. I think that since we already talked about the shortage of testing kits at the beginning of the pandemic and the shortage of N95 masks to hospitals and everything, that really the most ill prepared for all of the things that happened with this pandemic were the healthcare workers themselves, and they really weren't given many protections against it, and a lot of healthcare workers have had to take that on their own and design their own sorts of masks and gear to help protect themselves. And so I definitely think that might have been politically motivated and more just along the lines of what the parties value in power right now rather than what the public actually needed. So, but also,
what
was that, Nate?
It could have gone to vaccine research too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another missed opportunity.
Yep, that is true. I mean, you hear about them trying to push out the vaccine by November 1st if they were very concerned about the vaccine being made properly and having the amount of research that needs to be put into it. Then I would think that the money would go more towards the research behind that rather than the military defense and all. Just saying that they were affected negatively by the pandemic, because a lot of people were, and a lot of industries were. And I mean, we definitely should value our military, but I mean, during times like these, we're not really at war with anyone. We're not looking to attack anyone, and we don't need to defend ourselves from anything but a pandemic currently. So I think that's definitely a good point. But I think that's kind of like along the lines, like the world has been kind of critical, and even people in the U.S. public have been critical of the way the government has handled the pandemic here in the U.S. So I think another issue is kind of the discrepancies between how we identify COVID and how people in the country take it seriously. Some people would be going to get tested after every symptom they exhibit. Some people wouldn't be. So one of the biggest concerns is kind of telling the difference between this condition, I mean, the pandemic that is COVID, and other conditions and illnesses that may be out there. And a big one of this is allergies. I know I definitely have seasonal allergies and allergies to pets. So I've experienced this sort of like self-doubt in my mind.
So yeah, so obviously we're changing seasons from summer to fall. And I know personally, like when it gets like to cooler temperatures, I start to get a cough, I start to get a runny nose. This is just normal for me. I'm noticing it now. Um, but COVID, you look at the fine line between those, and with COVID, you could have similar symptoms. Now, say you cough in public, people now might look at you differently because they don't know whether you have it or not. There's no way they can tell. You can say that's just allergies, but who knows if you're lying or not, or whether you chose not to get tested or not. No one knows. So really, what I researched was how to tell what's a symptom of COVID that could be different than allergies, what could be just unique to COVID. And one of the things I found was a shortness of breath. Like if you notice that you're panting like you just jogged a lot or ran, then you could have a shortness of breath that is not normal. And that's not normal to what a usual allergy would be. And it also goes with the flu. The flu, you could see symptoms right when you get it. COVID, it could stay in an incubation period in your body longer than the flu. So those are just a couple of the symptoms that I found that are different. I think there's people who are going to overreact with every little thing and want to get tested and just know right away whether they have it or not. And there are people who just either don't want to take the virus seriously or think it's really no big deal. They get these symptoms all the time, and then they're unknowingly spreading it to other people. So I think there's a little of both there, but I'd say if, you don't usually get allergies this time of year and you're getting symptoms, then it's a good idea to get tested.
Yeah.
I'm one of the people who, I hate to say it, but I overreact sometimes. Like I'm definitely the worst, like WebMDing all my symptoms and thinking I'm completely dying. Never, I'm good. But like I'm definitely like, I'll be tired and I'm like, oh no, it's fatigue from COVID. Of course, I never really like go get tested for it. It's gone soon enough. But I feel like there's a lot of people out there, like we probably need to relax a bit and just, it's just natural stuff. It's not always going to be COVID, but it's just difficult because it's always on our minds. Like you see it everywhere with the masks and everything. It's just hard to kind of forget about it and be like, I think we're okay when the world feels like it's
another
ending.
symptom I forgot to mention that's unique is the loss of taste or smell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's one of them where it's not normal necessarily from what you hear from other.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely heard about that, especially in the asymptomatic cases where people aren't really very severely affected by it. That's the one thing that like a lot of people have noticed was that loss of taste or smell. And I mean, really, that is something that is kind of unique to this, luckily, that people can pinpoint. They just have to be very cautious, and they need to be vigilant about their real like well-being all the time and notice those type of things. Well, what do you think, Quigs?
Um, I suffer from a laundry list of allergies. So this is something that is an interesting topic to me because on one hand, I feel like people who do suffer from allergies, like whether it be seasonal or a food allergy or something like that, I think we know what it feels like to when that allergen hits us and what our body's response to that is. Like personally, I can't see myself, or I'm not really worried about myself seeing my allergy symptoms and not recognizing that it's COVID, because it's just, I feel like you know your body and you know when you have a virus and you know when you got some pollen in your eye or something like that. But in terms of shortness of breath and the loss of taste and smell, I think that's kind of an interesting symptom in terms that, I mean, I've certainly had allergies and lost my taste and smell, but you know it's because you're stuffed up. So I feel like that is probably like, if you're not stuffed up or something like that and you lose that taste and smell and you're like, this isn't allergies, that's when I could see like me or someone else getting tested.
Yeah. So, I mean, aside from the COVID stories, another topic that's kind of been popping up quite frequently in the news today is just everything revolving around the political situation with Election Day coming up, and everything has been quite a tense political landscape. And one of the biggest stories around this was Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying. She passed away at the age of 87 after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. And so, I mean, she headed many movements for gender equality and women's rights. So she was very renowned in her role. And so, I mean, she really, her death rocked the political world and has really been one of the focal points of all political leaders out there vying for power. So, fortunately, it's been surrounded by a lot more controversy than really the compassion you'd expect when somebody dies. Just because it is such a controversial time in our political landscape. So a lot of people have been using it as a political tool and kind of trying to talk about it just to get their names in the press. So, I mean, really the biggest thing around it was how she'll be replaced and when she'll be replaced and whether it's appropriate timing for her to be replaced. So that was really kind of one of the biggest stories out there about her death this week, was just how Republican leaders are kind of rushing to get her replaced by a Republican nominee before Election Day. And that being kind of, I mean, a lot of people are saying that's very kind of disrespectful. It's also just not politically appropriate to go and push for someone to be replacing her after her unfortunate death less than a year before Election Day, never mind a couple of months. So really that was one of the biggest things that both Democratic and Republican leaders have been talking about, and whether or not they'll go forth with that. She was quoted as saying her most fervent wish was not to be replaced until a new president is installed. And I mean, granted, Republicans have came at that statement saying that it was drafted by Democratic leaders to kind of just rock their chances of winning an election. And but one of the things that came out of this was kind of a unified voter registration. There was a surging in voter registration. I know that the voter registration day was 2 weeks ago, and so there was that 68% increase in voter registration, which was great to see. But still, after her passing, there was a 42% increase in voter registration from the prior week. So, I mean, it's going up, and people are all kind of making the decision to vote one way or another. And in a way, I kind of looked at as a positive thing, because it's really the most unified we've been this whole year, in my opinion. So, I mean, one question I had for you all was just whether you think it's appropriate to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg before Election Day. I'll start with Quiggs on this one.
I don't think it's appropriate, especially considering what we just went through in the Obama administration with the same issue. And when that was going on, and it was nowhere close to being this close to the election. We're a month out. I mean, Republicans are throwing a fit about Obama maybe appointing a justice like when he had a year left. So I just think that flip-flop, especially for Mitt Romney and like Republican leaders, just shows like a complete lack of actual respect for the political system. And I think it just really showcases that this is all about party versus party. The Republicans don't care about the actual citizens of the United States. They care about keeping power. And if it's the Obama administration and they can keep power by saying this is completely inappropriate, they're going to say it. But if it's the Trump administration and they can keep power by saying, of course this is appropriate, they're going to say that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of hypocrisy there. Wow, what do you say, Rachel? What do you think?
I definitely agree. It's really just like, I'll follow this rule if it's in my favor, but I won't if it's not in my favor. It's just like everyone just wants to do what's in their favor, which, you know, makes sense. People want power, power hungry people in power right now. So I think it's just people trying to get what they want, even if it means breaking the rules. Obviously, we've seen that a lot in the presidency. Just like a lot of rules have been broken, but because he can do it, it's not talked about. So I think it's a little messed up there that a lot of rule breaking has been happening in the past 4 years.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that there's some of the things we've seen in the past 4 years are definitely a lot different than what we'd see in past presidents. And Nate, what do you think?
I think that we should wait until after the election. I think, the election is in 2 months. So pretty much, I think if, Republicans win, then they can choose, or Democrats win, then they can choose. But I think to do it before is kind of, it's a little bit disrespectful.
Definitely. And so on a little bit of a lighter note, maybe for some, we have a bizarre story about a man who has died in Massachusetts, apparently from overconsumption of licorice. And so that story kind of shocked me, and Quiggs was the one that brought us that. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, Quiggs?
Sure. It's a pretty cut and dry case. Basically, this construction worker in Massachusetts really liked licorice, He was eating red Twizzlers, and then he decided to switch it up and switch to black licorice. And apparently, there's a compound in black licorice that, when consumed in high doses over a short period of time, can lead to death. And that's exactly what happened to this guy. He was eating a bag and a half of licorice per day, and he dropped dead. There it is. But there's no warnings, basically, on packaging for things that contain this licorice root extract that can, especially for people over 40 with certain heart conditions, really lead to some problems. So, yeah, I guess there's just a question about who's at fault here. Should there be labeling on these packages, or should you just not be eating that much licorice in the first place?
I think that the guy is definitely at fault, because you're eating a bag and a half of licorice per day. That's just not healthy. It doesn't matter what you do for other habits necessarily, but just that much licorice, it's just, I mean, yeah, you're asking for something bad to happen. So I think that the guy is at fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Definitely.
I've definitely eaten, like, if I like binge eat something, even if there is a label, I probably won't look at it. So maybe I understand if he just didn't really know that there would have been an issue. But I guess if he did have like pre-existing health conditions, maybe he definitely should have a better diet. But depends.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first I'd ever heard of it. I personally I can barely pronounce the name of the chemical that's in that. So, I mean, honestly, if it has the capacity to kill someone, then maybe it should be marked. But at the same time, this man was eating an absurd amount of licorice. So I don't know really what's to blame there. I mean, if this is something that continues, though, I'm sure we'll start to hear more on that, which will be quite interesting. But I know we went a little bit over, so I apologize. But I'd like to wrap up on that note. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'd like to thank Nate, Rachel, and Quiggs for researching and helping report on these topics, and hope everyone enjoys their night.
Thanks. Have a great week.